Announcements done. Papers have been laid. Question.
Yes, Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I've given notice of the following private notice question addressed to the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Gender Equality and Family Welfare, whether in regard to residential care institutions and shelters for minors, she will state the A, number thereof currently registered with her ministry, indicating the number operated by government and their current occupancy rate. B, total number of police complaints and serious reports lodged against all such facilities since December 2024 to date. And C, number of meetings held by the Interministerial Committee set up to review the situation at Shelter Cap de l'Espoir, indicating whether the committee has submitted its recommendations. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Yes, Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Gender.
Madam Speaker, I wish to thank the Honourable Leader of the Opposition for his question that would allow me to shed light on the situation at the residential care institutions, RCIs, and apprise the House on actions taken in relation thereat. Madam Speaker, this government remains firmly committed to ensuring that all RCIs for minors operate in a manner that safeguards the dignity, welfare, protection, and best interests of every child placed thereat. Residential care institutions, as defined in the Children's Act 2020, means a non-family-based group setting, such as a place of safety for emergency care, a transit center in emergency situations, and any other short-term and long-term residential care facility which provide care. The Residential Care Institutions for Children Regulations 2022 under Section 71 of the Children's Act 2020 provides for A, registration and licensing requirements, B, standards relating to accommodation, care, supervision and welfare of children, C, staffing and operational obligations, D, safeguarding and protection measures, E, record-keeping requirements, and F, inspection, monitoring, and enforcement mechanisms. Madam Speaker, RCIs constitute permanent alternative care placements for children committed to a place of safety following a determination of the court. The objective of RCIs is to provide children who cannot remain in parental care with a safe, stable, and protective environment. Residential care is not merely accommodation. It encompasses protection, rehabilitation, supervision, emotional support, education, and preparation for reintegration into society. Children placed in residential care often present complex emotional and development needs, requiring specialized care, trained caregivers, and coordinated interventions. The purpose of residential care is to ensure that children who are victims of abuse, neglect, abandonment, or severe family difficulties are protected from further harm while receiving appropriate care and support. Madam Speaker, Section 5B of RCIs for Children Regulations 2022 stipulates that state-owned residential care institutions for children shall be exempted from registration under these regulations. My ministry carries out regular inspections, monitoring exercises, and follow-up actions to ensure compliance with prescribed standards. Where shortcomings are identified, appropriate corrective measures are initiated in accordance with the law and established procedures. Madam Speaker, with regard to Part A of the question, I am informed that as at date, 7 residential care institutions are duly registered under the Residential Care Institutions for Children Regulations 2022. In addition, 1 is managed by the National Children's Council, the NCC, which operates under the aegis of my ministry. With regard to occupancy, the current occupancy rate across the only government-operated residential care facility for boys, residential care institution Cap Espoir, stands at 80%, 24 out of a maximum capacity of 30. Madam Speaker, the occupancy levels and the composition of the child population in RCIs are not static. Children enter and leave residential care in accordance with court orders, case management decisions, and the availability of family-based or community-based alternatives. Periodic review of placement in all RCIs is undertaken on a weekly basis. With regard to Part B of the question, I am informed by the Commissioner of Police that since December 2024 to date, a total of 34 police complaints have been lodged in relation to RCIs for minors registered with my ministry. I wish to draw the attention of the House that each report is subject to due process, whether through administrative inquiry, police investigation, or regulatory review. My ministry cooperates fully and without reservation with all relevant authorities. However, the volume of reports emanating from Cap Espoir in particular reflects a pattern of institutional difficulty that started long before I took office. The previous government regrettably has not been able to redress the situation. With regard to Part C of the question, I wish to inform the House that on 1st June 2025, my ministry was informed that 3 minors absconded from the RCI Cap Espoir. They were found and brought back to the RCI institution. They appeared disoriented and had reddish eyes. They were conveyed by the staff of the RCI to SSR National Hospital, where after examination, they were admitted. A rapid drug test was conducted, revealing positive results for cannabis in 2 children, while the 3rd child was tested negative. In view of the seriousness of the matter, I instituted an internal inquiry. Consequently, in order to prevent interference with evidence and intimidating the minors, 6 caregivers who were on duty at the material date and time and who are directly responsible for the care of these minors were suspended on 9th January 2026. Government took note of the situation at shelter Cap Espoir, Cap Malheureux, which was reopened on 5th December 2025, with new amenities and programs designed to strengthen a child-centered approach. A shelter manager was appointed on 5th December 2026, and he resigned on the 20th January 2026. Following a request from the Chief Government Whip, a delegation of members of the National Assembly visited the residential care institution at Cap Espoir on the 29th December 2025. Thereafter, Cap Espoir encountered repeated difficulties, disrupting disrupting its operation. Several incidents have been reported. The prevailing situation has resulted in persistent caregiver shortage, which compromises supervision and safety. Officers of my ministry, including psychologists, have conducted counseling sessions to address behavioral issues, trauma, and substance abuse, and a 24/7 police presence was provided. In light of the above, it was decided that an interministerial committee comprising representatives of relevant ministries would be set up to review the whole situation, including proposed amendments to the Children's Act of 2020. Given the complexity of the issues identified and the emerging challenges being encountered by multiple stakeholders engaged in the assessment, procedures involved rehabilitation, reintegration, and reinsertion of children with serious behavioral concerns, CSBC, an interministerial committee has been set up, co-chaired by the Attorney General and myself. The Minister of Education and Human Resources was later roped in, and the Ombudsperson for Children was co-opted. The objective of the committee was to come up with concrete solutions in addressing the existing gaps concerning children with serious behavioral concern and those in conflict with the law. The committee also comprised the Chief Government Whip, the Honourable Miss Stéphanie Antil, the Honourable Dr. Babita Tanou, Member of the National Assembly, representatives of the Office of the DPP, the Probation Office, the police, as well as officers of my ministry and that of the Prime Minister's Office. As at date, 4 meetings have been held. A first meeting was held on 4th February 2026, at which the stakeholders present were requested to submit proposals aimed at addressing loopholes in the current legislative framework, policies, and infrastructural arrangements. On 10th March 2026, a second meeting was held to take stock of the proposals received. Given the complexity of the issues, the committee considered it more appropriate to establish 2 distinct subcommittees, one dealing with matters involving CSBC, and the second one regarding children in conflict with the law, in order to undertake an in-depth analysis of the submissions made by all stakeholders concerned. A third meeting of the main committee was held on the 29th April 2026, to which the Honourable Minister of Education and Human Resource, as well as the Ombudsperson for Children were invited. During that meeting, it was agreed that there was an urgent need for an infrastructural facility specifically designed to cater for CSBC, separate from children who are in conflict with the law. Thus, consideration would be given to the requisite rehabilitation youth center infrastructure and trained staff being dedicated to an institution which would centralize service delivery for CSBC. Madam Speaker, a 4th meeting of the committee was held on 21st May 2026, and it was proposed that an interim report be drafted and government be apprised of the work conducted by the committee. Madam Speaker, since I took office in November 2024, I initiated the creation of a structured and inclusive governance model for Cap-less Poor. A steering committee has been established which meets on a monthly basis comprising officers of my ministry, 2 representatives among the caregivers and children, as well as staff of the National Children's Council. This goes beyond cosmetic change and builds a platform for accountability, collaborative solution finding, and the identification of problems of a more challenging nature that may arise. I can reassure the House that this structure has resulted in several positive changes, most notably the lines of communication between the management and the staff have been significantly improved. Certain operational processes have been reviewed and enhanced. My ministry conducted a dedicated training program in collaboration with an NGO in November 2025 for the upskilling of care staff. I must express my honest opinion. The children who are the focus of our attention deserve much more than the disgracefully low level of interest and enthusiasm demonstrated by some staff members during the training. Some staff members' attitude towards such training in this highly important field is extremely worrying. My ministry communicates regularly with the General Workers' Federation, the GWF, which represents some of the caregivers employed at the RCI. We meet often and share information with the Federation. The stance of the National Children's Council is to protect caregivers' jobs and work in close collaboration with them. Madam Speaker, there has been a deliberate pattern in this RCI. It has been observed that some caregivers have developed a clan-like behavior, which leads to manipulation of children, resulting in uncontrollable disruptive behavior. This type of behavior is irreconcilable with childcare standards and the profession's ethics and goes against the overall objective of childcare. I wish to highlight that most of this residential care institution staff have political affiliation, which seriously compromise the smooth running of the institution. Madam Speaker, following the resignation of Mr. S.B., shelter manager of Cap l'Espoir, on 20th January 26, urgent measures were required to ensure continuity of the operations of the RCI. All Assistant Child Program Officers, ACPU, were formally asked whether they would accept to act in the interim, and only Mrs. S.M., together with 2 Assistant Child Program Officers, Mrs. N.B. and Mrs. M.M., our support officers, accepted to assume responsibility. The board of the NCC approved these interim appointments on 12 January 2026. On 20th April 2026, Mrs. S.M. stepped down due to health reasons, and the 2 support officers also subsequently stepped down. The board of the NCC approved the assignment of Mrs. B.S. as acting shelter manager and the support officers on the 23rd of April this year. In the light of the persistent management challenges, my ministry has, on several occasions, launched expressions of interest, inviting NGOs to take over the management of Cap l'Espoir. I regret to inform this House that none of these exercises have been responsive. My ministry has thus launched another expression of interest on 12 May 2026 with closing date on 12 June 2026. I thank you.
Yes, the first question.
Yes, Madam Speaker. I understand the situation is quite important. The Honorable Deputy Prime Minister has taken more than 20 minutes
Yes.
in a reply. I
I
hope
noted.
you'll give me enough time to put my supplementary
course.
questions. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister inform the House whether the Interministerial Committee has identified any proposed amendments to be brought to the Children's Act, and if yes, can she inform the House of the proposed amendments?
Madam Speaker, as I explained in the answer, there is the committee which has been set up. There is a report which is being prepared. The report will be submitted to the Cabinet, and then we can give instructions to the State Law Office to whatever amendments need to be provided to existing legislation.
Yes, your second question.
The Deputy Prime Minister is aware of the urgency of the situation,
Yes,
Madam
I
Speaker.
can't hear you
Can the
very
Honourable... I said, I hope the Deputy
Yeah,
Prime
that's it.
Minister is aware of the urgency of the situation, Madam Speaker. Can the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister inform the House where matters stand concerning the transfer of the Rehabilitation Youth Centre from the purview of the Prime Minister's office to her ministry?
Madam Speaker, this is still being discussed. As I said, this will form part of the decisions, of the recommendations made by the Interministerial Committee, which will be submitted to Cabinet shortly.
Yes, third question.
Can the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister assure the House that every minor currently accommodated in government shelters is subject first to regular risk assessment and independent monitoring and an individualized care plan to guarantee their physical safety, psychological well-being and protection from harm? Can you confirm
Yes,
that?
they are.
Let me come to the next question
Next
then,
question.
which is related to Shelter Cap l'Espoir. Can the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister confirm whether any reports have been received regarding minors at the Shelter Cap l'Espoir having been tattooed while in care, and if so, will she inform the House what protocols are in place and what measures have been taken to investigate same?
Madam Speaker, I am informed that on the 10th May 2026, at approximately 16 hours, a caregiver reported by text message that certain residents appeared to have tattoos on their hands. Immediate follow-up was undertaken at Shelter Cap Malheureux. Upon arrival, caregivers confirmed observation of a tattoo on a minor. Questioning of residents in the elder boys section revealed 5 minors with tattoos. Additional information indicated that some minors had also tattooed themselves, while one had refused to be tattooed. Residents stated that the tattoos were made voluntarily and confirmed use of a shared needle. Actions taken. Caregivers accompanied the 5 residents to SSRN Hospital for immediate medical assessment. Rapid tests were conducted. All results were negative. On 11th May 2026, some minors underwent rapid testing at Goodlands Mediclinic. Results were negative. These minors had initially resisted testing. On the same day, 4 residents underwent blood withdrawal at SSR and hospital and were referred to Cordus Hospital for further testing. The current status is as follows. All residents concerned are reported to be in good health. No illness has been detected to date. Police inquiry is ongoing.
Yes.
Yes. This is a very serious matter. Can the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister confirm whether her ministry has established protocols governing medical examinations, including blood tests for minors in such situations?
I have already answered that question, Madam Speaker.
Yes?
Je pourrais demander à l'honorable vice-premier ministre combien d'enfants fréquentent actuellement l'école? Parce que selon certaines informations recueillies, il y a pas mal d'enfants qui ne sont pas scolarisés.
Selon mes informations, Madame la Présidente, tous les enfants sont scolarisés.
And the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister confirmed to the House, if police officers maintain a permanent presence within the shelter, and may I ask her whether she finds that normal?
Madam Speaker, this is a very good question because we have discovered that security, which are at the gate, they are not very effective. So we have to have resort to police officers to guard the gate. We have this morning addressed a correspondence to the security company to remove to change to the present security guards and replace him.
Yes? I'm not keeping count, but go ahead.
Yeah, can the Deputy Prime Minister then confirm that the permanent presence of police officers inside a children's shelter reflects a serious institutional failure?
Madam Speaker, we have to look at the security of the safety of the children. We have, as I have just explained, the company which ensures safety of the children have proved ineffective. We have written to them, but meanwhile, for the safety of the children, we have to have recourse to police officers.
Your next question.
Yes, Madam Speaker. Following reports of food safety concerns at the shelter, including spoiled food items served to minors in early May, can the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister confirm whether a formal inquiry was conducted and what are the measures which have been implemented to improve the situation?
Madam Speaker, I think that last week I answered a question following the PQ put by Honourable Ancil with regard to mold bread which was served to children. An inquiry has been conducted. It avers that the cook stated that she did not find out that the food was not appropriate, and because there was not enough light in the kitchen. The officers went there and found that this was not true. The cook was immediately removed and was replaced by another one. I must say that the Ministry of Health, the officers of the Ministry of Health come regularly at the shelter to check the health protocol.
Yes?
May I put that question to the Deputy Prime Minister, whether she can confirm to the House whether the personnel responsible for food preparation all the relevant certifications and have received training on food hygiene standards?
I must check that information, Madam Speaker.
All right, good. Yes, Honourable Leader?
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Can the Deputy Prime Minister inform the House which categories of officials or authorized visitors are permitted to interact directly with minors in those shelters, and whether there are requirements with regard to vetting and training?
Madam Speaker, whenever someone wants to visit the shelter, and a formal letter has to be sent to the ministry, and the letter is examined by the PS, and the authorization to visit the shelter is given or not given.
Yes?
Yes, Madam Speaker. Can the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister then confirm whether any senior political appointee or advisor his ministry has engaged in direct interaction with minors at shelter Cap l'Espoir?
Yes, Minister?
Madam Speaker, any officer authorized by the ministry, by the PS, can interact with the child, with the children in the shelter.
Can you, I'm sorry, can you answer the question?
Just answer.
All right?
Answer is positive, Madam Speaker. Then, can the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister outline the professional qualifications, the child protection training or relevant expertise that authorize such engagement, and whether these interactions were recorded or logged in accordance with the shelter's safeguarding policy?
Yes, Deputy Prime Minister.
I need notice of the question.
Okay. Chief Whip is asking for a question.
Please, of course.
Go ahead.
Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente. L'adjointe au Premier ministre pourrait-elle indiquer à la Chambre quelles mesures correctives et immédiates ont été prises afin de démanteler les clans au sein du personnel du shelter Cap l'Espoir auquel elle a fait référence la semaine dernière dans cette Chambre sur ma question. Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente.
Madame la Présidente, une enquête est actuellement initiée par le ministère et les actions appropriées vont être prises.
D'accord. You got one more?
Won't that please? Let me come to my next question, Madam Speaker. In
I'm
December
giving you more time.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. In December 2025, the Deputy Prime Minister indicated to the House that solutions would be found to stabilize the shelter. We are now in May, and the situation has gone from bad to worse, Madam Speaker. Can the Honourable Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, confirm to the House when sustainable reforms will be implemented for that shelter?
Madam Speaker, I do not agree at all that the situation has come from bad to worse. We are doing all that we can to ensure that things go smoothly in the shelter. And I am satisfied that things are getting better, in spite of the fact that there are clans. As I said, there is an inquiry which has been initiated by the ministry on these caregivers who are manipulating the children, and measures will be taken, actions will be taken as appropriate.
May I put my last question, Madam
Yes.
Speaker? Since the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister stated that the children were consuming drugs in that shelter, and maybe I ask it differently, is she aware that they are also consuming synthetic drugs in that shelter?
Madam Speaker, each and every time there is suspicion that there is a child who is consuming drugs or whatever illicit products, immediately the child is taken to hospital for appropriate tests. I can assure the House for this.
Yes, Ms. Antil.
Je vous remercie.
Honorable Antil.
Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente. Dans sa réponse, l'adjointe au Premier ministre a indiqué tout à l'heure que la NCC gère le shelter Cap l'Espoir. Pourrait-elle indiquer à la Chambre si elle est satisfaite de la performance et du leadership de l'officier en charge de la NCC? Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, Deputy
Madame
Prime
la Présidente, je ne peux pas donner une opinion. C'est une question d'opinion.
Okay, time is up. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Motion.
Yes, Honourable Prime Minister.
That all the business on today's order paper be exempted from the provisions of paragraph 2 of Standing Order 10.
Yes, the question is, it has to be seconded. Seconded, motion, yes, thank you. The question is that all the business on today's order paper be exempted from the provisions of paragraph 2 of Standing Order 10. Those in favour say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it.
Statement by Ministers none. Public Bill, second reading.
Yes, honourable third member for Grand-Bay Poudre d'Or.
Voyez-vous, Madame la Présidente,
Attendez, quietly, please. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Italia, please.
voyez-vous, Madame la Présidente, nous sommes devenus indépendants en 1968.
Voilà, parlez un petit peu plus fort.
Vous aimez que je recommence?
Non, non, allez-y. Mais faites un effort.
Et depuis, vous-même, vous avez été témoin d'un certain nombre d'amendements de notre Constitution. Je vous donne 3. En 1982, lorsque le gouvernement MMM-PSM rend les élections générales obligatoires tous les 5 ans. 1992, lorsque nous abandonnons le statut de monarchie constitutionnelle pour devenir une république souveraine. Et 2001, lorsque Maurice accorde l'autonomie à Rodrigue. Au total, depuis 1968, il y a eu une vingtaine d'amendements techniques et politiques. Ce que nous abordons aujourd'hui est un chantier d'une toute autre ampleur. Je salue donc l'initiative du Premier ministre de vouloir moderniser notre Constitution. Avec la Constitutional Review Commission Bill, elle respecte une promesse électorale de l'Alliance du changement de consolider notre démocratie et nos institutions démocratiques. Ce n'est pas encore la réforme, ça viendra, c'est l'étape qui permet de dire voilà ce qui doit changer, pourquoi et comment. Ce que le projet de loi propose ne concerne pas le gouvernement en place, ne concerne pas seulement le gouvernement en place, il coule dans le bronze les principes fondamentaux qui vont guider le futur gouvernement aussi dans leur action. Ce n'est pas une initiative partisane, mais place la gouvernance du pays dans les girons du respect des uns et des autres. Madame la Présidente, nous saisissons aujourd'hui une belle opportunité. Les dernières élections ont donné à cette législature la majorité nécessaire pour apporter des changements fondamentaux dans la façon dont nous voulons conduire notre vie politique, économique, sociale et culturelle. Ce gouvernement fonce dans le même sens. Le projet de loi présenté par le Premier ministre définit clairement les champs d'intérêt pour les futurs amendements. Les orateurs avant moi m'ont précédé, qui m'ont précédé ont déjà parlé beaucoup. Je ne vais donc pas parler de la consécration du principe de la liberté d'expression avec un Freedom of Information Bill à la clé, ce qui est une avancée démocratique majeure. Il ne s'agit pas d'un cadeau à ce métier d'informer, mais simplement de créer les conditions dans lesquelles les journalistes et les gens qui travaillent avec l'information peuvent exercer leur métier, y compris avoir l'accès à l'information. Je ne veux pas parler de la création d'une commission qui serait chargée de nommer des dirigeants à des fonctions stratégiques. Une telle instance, si elle fonctionne bien, assurerait la nomination des personnes crédibles, qualifiées, compétentes, propres à des postes de responsabilité. Je ne veux pas parler du droit de rappel des élus, la disqualification en cas d'abus de confiance. Madame la Présidente, je ne veux pas parler de l'idée de mettre fin au transfusisme au sein de notre Parlement, ce phénomène détestable qui a fait fi de la volonté des électeurs à maintes reprises. Je ne vais pas parler d'un éventuel mode d'élection du président par un collège électoral qui garantira que ce premier personnage de l'État n'est pas assouvi à aucun parti politique, ce qui va évidemment dans le bon sens. Je ne vais pas parler non plus de la possibilité d'ouvrir la voie à des recours collectifs devant la justice, ce qui est une excellente chose. Ce dont je vais parler ici, c'est pourquoi tout d'un coup, la révision de la Constitution est devenue importante et pressante. Ils sont nombreux, nos compatriotes, qui accueille cette initiative avec un certain scepticisme. Cette réserve a une cause, la lassitude. On a eu des commissions dans le passé, des consultations et des rapports qui dorment dans les tiroirs. Et dans la vie quotidienne, les gens attendent encore de soulagement sur le coût de la vie, l'accès à la justice, l'accès au logement. Il faut respecter cette lassitude qui est légitime. Madame la Présidente, cette lassitude, ce n'est pas seulement ce sentiment que ça ne marche pas. C'est aussi l'idée que de rien ne peut marcher, que tout le système est pourri, que seul le langage possible est la dénonciation permanente. Nous devons des réponses à ces inquiétudes en disant que l'ancrage de notre pays dans un modèle démocratique est une exigence. Il faut faire comprendre à nos concitoyens que nos libertés, nos droits de vote, notre liberté d'expression, notre droit à la justice, l'égalité des chances, tous garantis par la Constitution, par une Constitution renforcée, sont tout aussi importants que le droit à l'alimentation, à l'éducation, au logement, au travail, à la sécurité, à la protection. Madame la Présidente, la frustration fait les lits aux dérives autoritaires. Une Constitution renforcée, après l'exercice qui commence aujourd'hui, qui a commencé l'autre jour, une Constitution renforcée y fera barrage. Aux élections générales de 2024, nos compatriotes ont dit non aux violations diverses de nos libertés par l'ancien régime. Durant la période 2014 à 2024, ils en ont pris plein la poire. Élections renvoyées, journalistes arrêtés pour la moindre critique, télévision nationale devenue His Master's Voice, réseaux sociaux sous surveillance. Pour faire taire ses opposants, l'ancien régime a même eu recours au drug planting accusant des innocents de trafic. Les tontons Macoutes et les barons de la drogue faisaient la loi. Le cahier des charges de la commission qui proposera la modernisation de notre Constitution abordera heureusement l'idée d'instituer une division spéciale au cours de la Cour suprême pour traiter les violations des droits de l'homme. L'idée étant de mettre un frein définitif aux abus. Madame la Présidente, il faut prendre les dérives autoritaires au sérieux. Les tendances sont bien marquées, non seulement on l'a vu avec l'ancien régime, les tendances sont bien marquées dans le monde. Ça n'arrive pas qu'aux autres. Selon l'Institut Vie-Démocratie de l'Université de Göteborg, la régression globale de la démocratie est évidente. 74% de la population mondiale, soit 6 milliards de personnes vivent désormais sous un régime autocratique. Madame la Présidente, puisque le projet de loi présenté par le Premier ministre que nous discutons maintenant donne une marge de manœuvre à la Commission de faire d'autres propositions d'amendements pour moderniser, renforcer la Constitution, je souhaite ici en faire deux. Le premier est politique. Il faut faire barrage au populisme. Les phénomènes gagnent la planète entière et il y a des populistes comme Donald Trump qui est arrivé au pouvoir avec des conséquences que nous connaissons. En France, les rassemblements nationaux se trouvent à la porte de l'Élysée. Au Royaume-Uni, le Reform Party des Farage vient de faire des ravages aux récentes élections régionales. En Allemagne, l'AfD gagne dangereusement du terrain. Chez nous aussi, les populistes sont à l'œuvre. Le populisme attaque les piliers de la démocratie. Il remplace l'argument par l'invective, il remplace la procédure par l'urgence, il remplace la responsabilité par le coup de gueule. Le risque, c'est de sortir du jeu démocratique pour entrer dans une logique de confrontation permanente. Et une société qui ne peut pas réviser ses règles en commun est une société qui se fige, qui se fracture. La Constitution, la nouvelle Constitution sur laquelle nous allons travailler maintenant, devrait faire barrage à ceux qui promettent monts et merveilles. Le populisme donne des faux espoirs en faisant des promesses qui ne sont pas réalisables et se nourrit de la haine et de la négativité. Le populisme chez nous, Madame la Présidente, c'est le mauvais procès d'intention de la part de l'une qui voit un docteur Ramgoulam président à vie. Le populisme, c'est d'entendre un autre promettre de revenir en arrière avec la réforme du système de pension universel à l'encontre de tout bon sens. Le populisme, c'est distribuer de l'argent qu'on n'a pas. Le populisme, c'est de voter une loi hier et de ne pas l'assumer aujourd'hui sur fond de rancœur. Le populisme, c'est il n'y a qu'à. Madame la Présidente, ce n'est pas de la bonne guerre, c'est quand le populisme est destructeur. Je suis effaré de constater une réaction populaire tout récemment, de constater la négativité qui prévaut dans le pays. Il y a 2 semaines, la Central Water Authority a annoncé un plan d'amélioration de distribution d'eau à hauteur de 2,9 milliards de roupies. Quelle bonne nouvelle! D'autant plus que les travaux auront lieu dans ma circonscription. Je suis encore effaré de noter la négativité autour de cette initiative qui entend résoudre les problèmes d'eau que nous connaissons dans le Nord, et c'est grave. Il y a même une personne qui assume des responsabilités, qui a osé dire « est-ce qu'il robinet pour en or ?» Ma deuxième proposition, Madame la Présidente, concerne l'économie. Dans un passé très récent, le Premier ministre en a parlé la semaine passée, nous avons vu les excès en matière de dépenses publiques. En matière de dépenses publiques, et nous sommes là vraiment endettés jusqu'au cou. C'est criminel d'emmener le pays jusque-là. C'est criminel dans la mesure où une telle extravagance met en péril non seulement la population du jour, mais compromet aussi les générations futures. Nous savons comment la dette publique est passée de 58% du PIB en 2014 pour atteindre le taux faramineux de 90% en 2024, 89%. C'est du danger public. Je plaide, Madame la Présidente, pour une clause constitutionnelle frein à l'endettement pour fixer un taux maximal de 60%, ce qui nous obligera à ne pas vivre au-dessus de nos moyens. Madame la Présidente, réformer, moderniser la Constitution, c'est un acte de responsabilité, comme dit le Premier ministre. Merci.
Je vous remercie surtout d'avoir respecté le temps. Honorable Duval.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, constitutional reform is far too important to become another endless consultation exercise, another report gathering dust in a drawer, or merely another public relation exercise. There's a famous saying, Madam Speaker, if you want to bury an issue, appoint a commission. Another says, nothing is more permanent than a temporary commission. Madam Speaker, that is precisely why there is today a legitimate concern that many have that this, unfortunately, may be the case. Why is that, Madam Speaker? Because this government was elected with an overwhelming majority, with a historic mandate, a clear and unequivocal promises being made on constitutional reform. The government program itself, Madam Speaker, promised constitutional reform within 6 months of the elections. Yet, 1.5 years later, we are still here discussing the modalities of a commission. Madam Speaker, the issue is therefore not whether constitutional reform is necessary. That is, we know it. Nor is it whether some constitutional reform genuinely require deep consultation, expert constitutional reflection and broad national participation. They absolutely do, Madam Speaker. The Constitution is sacred. It is the backbone of our republic. In many respects, it is as fundamental to a nation as a birth certificate is to an individual. And, Madam Speaker, credit must be given where credit is due. Constitutional reform should never be bought behind the back of the electorate through disguise or without democratic legitimacy and broad national consensus. When dealing with difficult and complex constitutional questions, the most democratic approach is often to appoint a Constitutional Review Commission, to hold public hearings, to engage in broad consultations, and to have meaningful participation at a national level. We are not the first country, however, to choose this path to constitutional reform. And, Madam Speaker, the issue here, the real issue, is will this commission become a genuine mechanism for constitutional reform or merely a mechanism for constitutional delay? And that is a valid question. Because without strict deadline, without a staged implementation roadmap, without mandatory interim reporting, given the broad status that has been given, the broad Section 4, and without clear implementation objectives, then there's a risk, Madam Speaker, that the process simply drifts indefinitely. And that is not theoretical. Mauritius has seen, Madam Speaker, its fair share of commissions, reports, consultations, and reform exercises, which ultimately produce little to no concrete implementation. I think here, in particular, of the countless recommendations made by the Truth and Justice Commission, which for many years now have largely remained in the drawer without any meaningful implementation. This is precisely why, Madam Speaker, timelines, interim reporting, and clear reform objectives are absolutely essential. The terms of reference under Section 4 are extraordinarily broad, Madam Speaker, and no country embarking on serious constitutional reform have left such a process so entirely open-ended. In fact, when we examine the comparable constitutional reform processes across the Commonwealth, virtually all of these countries had imposed strict timelines upon their own respective constitutional review commissions. For example, Madam Speaker, Australia, it embarked on a complete constitutional review and had set 2.5 years, 2.5 years as a deadline. Barbados, 6 months for its parliamentary reform and 15 months for its constitutional reform. Tanzania, the Gambia, 18 months for deep constitutional reforms. Kenya, 12 months, Madam Speaker. Mauritius should not become the exception. And this is why, Madam Speaker, I humbly suggest 3 things. First, that there is an interim report dealing with the less complex reforms within the next 3 to 6 months. Then, after that, periodic interim report if necessary. And finally, and that is the most important, a final report within a maximum of 18 months as from the inception of the Commission, so as to allow government, Madam Speaker, to finalize draft constitutional amendments by the end of next year and bring constitutional amendments to Parliament by at latest, mid-2028. Otherwise, there is a risk that a PR exercise. Once the Commission has completed its work, Madam Speaker, in my opinion, it no longer has a raison d'être. It should become functus officio, stand dissolved thereafter. Otherwise, this Commission would risk becoming, yet again, another permanent institution with no clear point, no clear endpoint, no meaningful implementation outcome, a money pit for endless wastage of public funds. Madam Speaker, in my view, there are two different categories of reform to be brought in Section 4 when we look at the objects of Section 4. Some reforms genuinely require deep constitutional reflection, expert consultation, and broad national consensus. Others are already mature, already been studied, and capable of implementation immediately in the very short term. And that is why I believe, Madam Speaker, that this bill is making a fundamental mistake, because Section 4, as it stands, throws everything together in one enormous constitutional basket, which risks paralyzing reforms which could and should be implemented rapidly. The longer-term reforms, Madam Speaker, these reforms include, for example, the electoral system, reform of our electoral system, to introduce proportional representation, more equitable delimitation of constituencies, the right to recall, anti-defection provision, political financing, strengthening of safeguards of the electoral process. These, I believe, it falls in the category of the long-term reforms. These also include the review of the DPP and of the institution, new generation rights, the rights of nature, environment, ecological rights, the enshrinement of the values of peace, justice, and liberty, all of that, freedom of information, in my view, are complex constitutional questions affecting the very architecture of the state itself. And therefore, they would justify the serious consultation, the expert constitutional work, the comparative analysis, and the broad national participation. Une commission pour étudier sérieusement et en profondeur ces questions, tant mieux, Madame la Présidente. But other reforms do not justify years of endless consultation. Some reforms are already matured, widely discussed, and capable of parallel legislative implementation immediately. Those include the creation of the new Court of Appeal and a constitutional division of the Supreme Court, the stronger protections for fundamental rights, the strengthening of the constitutional right to privacy, the Senior Appointments Committee, Senior Official Appointments Committee, the disability protections and inclusions, the mandatory holding of local elections, and the reforms to the Public Appeal Bodies Tribunal. In my view, 3 to 6 months would be more than sufficient for the Commission to issue, albeit on an interim basis, a report on those. Madam Speaker, let me begin now with the judiciary. The government programme states, at paragraph 58, a superior court of appeal, as recommended in Lord Mackay's report, will be established. However, when you read section 4K of this bill, it merely refers to the creation of a court of appeal within the Supreme Court. And there is a huge difference. This is not at all what Lord Mackay had proposed. He proposed a distinct, independent, institutionally separate Court of Appeal, with its own judges, its own staff. Why? To strengthen judicial independence, to reinforce public confidence in the judiciary, and to improve the quality and consistency of appellate decision. Lord Mackay himself observed that the present system, where judges frequently hear appeals against decisions of their colleagues within the same court structure, could create at least the perception that judges may, consciously or unconsciously, stand by each other. These are not my words. These are Lord Mackay's words. Therefore, Madam Speaker, government, whether it genuinely intends or not to implement Lord Mackay's recommendation, here what it is doing, it is bringing merely a diluted version of it, because the wording that has been chosen within as opposed to superior makes all the difference, Madam Speaker. As regards the proposed constitutional division, I fully agree, Madam Speaker, that it should ideally derive its authority directly from the Constitution itself, unlike ordinary divisions of the Supreme Court as we have today. But both reforms, Madam Speaker, both reforms should not simply be buried within a constitutional process that may last years on years and should be taken swiftly. Madam Speaker, the right to privacy, As regards the strengthening of constitutional right to privacy, as it stands under Section 9 of the Constitution, it is now more than urgent and necessary, more than ever, to come with appropriate protection and to now encompass communications, personal data, and digital privacy rights. But what is equally important and urgent for government, Madam Speaker, is to proceed in parallel right now with specific legislation regulating state surveillance, interception of communication, monitoring powers, and criminal sanctions, and that is the very important part, for misuse and abuse thereof. Most Commonwealth jurisdictions, Madam Speaker, already have such legislations in place. I said last time, in the UK, the Investigatory Powers Act 2016. In other countries of the Commonwealth, small islands like Mauritius, Jamaica, Barbados, St. Lucia, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Kitts and Nevis, you have the Interception and Communications Act. Mauritius should not lag decades behind, and now is more than ever important to do so. Madam Speaker, provisional charges. The daily abuse by investigative authority of the system of provisional charges, Madam Speaker, remains one of the greatest injustices affecting ordinary citizens of this country. The system of arrest first, investigate later, cannot continue indefinitely. There are reportedly, Madam Speaker, up to 205,000 ongoing inquiries by the police as at 30 June 2025, unresolved inquiries, according to the Director of Audit, many of whom have laid provisional charges upon accused parties who've seen their rights of movement restricted, travel bans, and mandatory reporting obligations to police stations being imposed upon them. Many persons, Madam Speaker, remain provisionally charged for years without resolution. I myself have a PQ on this issue coming next Tuesday, addressed to the Attorney General. The Police and Criminal Justice Bill, promised by this government, which has been collecting dust since 2012, can no longer sit in the AG's drawer. Madam Speaker, the electoral reform, one of the most sensitive constitutional issues. Ever since independence, successive governments have repeatedly promised deep electoral reforms. And I fully accept that broad consultation is necessary. The bill refers to political financing, anti-defection provisions, right to recall, strengthening of powers and independence of the Electoral Commissioner. It remains silent, however, on other central pillars of the reform. In his speech, the Honourable Prime Minister did refer to proportional representation and to the electoral reform. But those appear nowhere in the bill, Madam Speaker. And these matters are far too important to remain vague or merely implied. There is also other fundamental issues that needs to be taken. That of a fairer, more balanced and more equitable delimitation of constituencies in terms of geographical size and voter population. That issue has received very little attention so far, yet it is an essential component of any serious electoral reform. Madam Speaker, the DPP's independence. I appreciate the words of the Prime Minister on the role played by the leader of the PMSD in defending the independence of the office of the DPP. History cannot be rewritten, Madam Speaker. Sir Gaëtan Duval himself knew perhaps more than anyone else the dangers that arise when prosecutorial powers fall under the political influence and control of the government of the day. Who can forget, Madam Speaker, the events of 1989? Who can forget when Sir Gaëtan Duval was arrested and prosecuted for purely political motives? Who can forget how the prosecutorial machinery of the office of the DPP had become relentlessly focused upon securing his convictions at all costs for political ends? Madam Speaker, who can forget that the DPP at that time then became Attorney General? Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister may not know him himself, but the Commissioner of Police at that time and the person who had presided over the preliminary inquiry, had later come to apologize in person to Sir Gaetan for their roles in that sordid affairs. And those are the things that profoundly marked the PMSD and deeply reinforced our conviction as to the absolute necessity for prosecutorial independence. And years later, Xavier Duval, but not alone, and all the members of the PMSD, first time in the history of this country, all 12 ministers, MPs, and private parliamentary secretaries resigned in solidarity. All 12. I myself was Deputy Speaker, Madam Speaker, and I resigned because that is how we feel about the independence of the DPP. And without the resignation of all 12, if it had been just a few of us, then it would have changed nothing to the sore of the DPP then and the DPP now, who would surely not have been in office to date. So that is what deprived government of its three-quarter majority, that collective resignation. Madam Speaker, why is that? Because whatever the flaws of an individual DPP, as a human being, and we are all flawed, it is infinitely preferable, Madam Speaker, to have an independent DPP than one operating under the whims, pressures, and caprices of government. Madam Speaker, I will...
Please.
The last point, and I conclude. Electoral College. The amendment has been circulated by the Prime Minister. Madam Speaker, I think that I fail to see, Madam Speaker, how the appointment of the President through an Electoral College would derive greater legitimacy than direct acceptance by the electorate itself. Parties should instead, Madam Speaker, be compelled prior to election day to disclose the names of the persons proposed to occupy the offices of President, Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, and perhaps also the Minister of Finance. That, in my respectful opinion, would be far more democratic and transparent. Madam Speaker, to conclude, there are many issues to talk on, flaws of this bill. There is no quorum, no qualification criteria, no voting mechanism, no true independence stated expressly from government. But be that as it may, time is of the essence. Like this Commission's work, I do not doubt government's good intention in bringing forward this bill. But, Madam Speaker, good intentions alone do not produce constitutional reforms. Implementation does. That is why I reiterate my proposals that the bill be amended now to impose a strict deadline of 18 months. First of all, to come with a final report, to require interim and the final report to be made public,
Okay.
Duty on the President to make the report public, for the report to be laid on the table of the National Assembly and be subject of debate by this House. For clarity of Section 4K in relation to the superiority and independence of the Court of Appeal, as well as what I said, express provision for the reform of our electoral system. This Commission, Madam Speaker, to conclude, and I thank you, cannot become a shield.
Especially as you can give your amendments later.
Yes, yes. This Commission, Madam Speaker, cannot become a shield behind which government hides if it ultimately fails to deliver upon the clear and unequivocal promises of constitutional and electoral reform made in 2024. They gave this government a mandate to deliver, and that is ultimately with what this government will be judged upon.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Yes, Honourable Junior Minister Parapan. I'm trying to be as lenient as I can to everyone. I'm noting the time.
Madame la Présidente, l'honorable Rametoria se demandait pourquoi il y a autant de négativité dans le pays. Et après avoir écouté l'intervention du Chief Whip, je crois qu'on comprend pourquoi.
Non, pas de Chief Whip.
Ah,
le Whip de l'opposition.
Le Whip de l'opposition. Mes excuses. M'excuse. Parce que le seul truc positif qu'il a retenu de l'intervention du Premier ministre, c'est quand le Premier ministre a félicité son parti et son papa.
Et moi aussi.
Donc, autant dire que ce fut un discours assez égocentrique. Madame la Présidente, notre Constitution n'est pas figée depuis 1968. Elle a été amendée à de maintes reprises depuis l'avènement d'une île Maurice indépendante, parfois pour des bonnes raisons, parfois pour des moins bonnes raisons. Parmi les avancées notables, on note l'âge du vote qui passe de 21 ans à 18 ans en 1975, l'accession au statut de République en 1992, l'autonomie de Rodrigue, comme l'a mentionné l'honorable Etoiria en 2001, ou encore le mini-amendement constitutionnel de 2014. Et parmi les moins bonnes, on retrouve le renvoi des élections générales de 1972, ou encore l'amendement de 2002 qui permet de détenir un citoyen pour 36 heures incommunicado en relation avec la Prevention of Terrorism Act. Amendement qui avait d'ailleurs précipité la démission du président et du vice-président d'alors. Loin de moi, Madame la Présidente, la prétention de réécrire l'histoire, c'est uniquement une piqûre de rappel des événements qui ont marqué l'histoire de notre pays à travers des amendements à notre Constitution. Ce qui ressort principalement de ces amendements passés, c'est qu'ils ont été introduits de manière chirurgicale, au gré de conjonctures politiques, géopolitiques ou juridiques spécifiques. Et c'est en cela que le projet de loi dont nous débattons aujourd'hui, le Constitutional Review Commission Bill, a le potentiel de rompre avec les amendements constitutionnels chirurgicaux du passé. Pour la première fois de notre jeune histoire, nous ouvrons la porte à une refonte élargie, structurelle et moderne de notre Constitution. Dans son intervention sur le Constitutional Review Commission Bill mardi dernier, le leader de l'opposition a dit, et je cite, « Je suis contre le fait que le gouvernement et les partis de l'alliance gouvernementale imposent les propositions dans ce projet de loi à la commission qui va être mise sur pied. Je m'oppose à un processus qui commence à l'envers, qui impose un agenda au lieu d'écouter le peuple. » Fin de citation. Madame la Présidente, l'honorable leader de l'opposition se trompe, comme souvent, sur toute la ligne. On pourrait même dire qu'il nage en plein délire. Les termes de référence de cette commission n'ont pas été élaborés dans des salles fermées par des technocrates, contrairement à ce qu'il affirme. Elles ne sont certainement pas non plus le fruit d'un plat concocté par la cuisine d'un État parallèle, loin des yeux de la population. Non, Madame la Présidente, les termes de référence de cette commission reposent sur une validation populaire. Elles émanent d'un engagement de l'Alliance du changement pris pendant la campagne électorale de 2024. Les 18 propositions qui vont être examinées par le Constitutional Review Commission Bill, une fois que la loi est votée, ces 18 propositions figuraient toutes dans le programme électoral de l'Alliance et elles ont été plébiscitées massivement par l'électorat en novembre 2024. Madame la Présidente, pour nous, les papillons de résistance et alternative, ce projet de loi revêt une importance capitale Ce n'est pas un projet de loi comme les autres. Il incarne dans bien de façons l'ADN et la raison d'être de mon parti politique. Le 10 octobre 2024, l'accord électoral entre Résistance et Alternative et les autres membres de l'Alliance du Changement, notamment le Parti travailliste, le MMM et les Nouveaux démocrates, a été officiellement signé au Hennessy Park à Eben par les leaders respectifs de l'Alliance. Cet accord électoral reposait sur 12 points et il avait été conclu après plusieurs semaines de négociations. Séance de négociation où le sujet principal de discussion était les grandes réformes systémiques à apporter en cas de victoire. Cet accord, je l'ai entre les mains, enfin j'ai une copie entre les mains aujourd'hui. Et avec votre permission, je voudrais lire le préambule du point 2 de l'accord qui s'intitule « Le changement du système politique pour une République de Maurice 2.0 ». Les 4 parties en discussion sont d'accord qu'un changement de gouvernement seul n'est pas suffisant. Ce changement se doit d'être accompagné d'une politique de transition visant la transformation structurelle de fond de la politique et de l'administration de la vie publique au sein de la République pour un meilleur vivre ensemble au sein de la société. Ces propositions de changement systémique visent à donner plus de pouvoir au peuple afin qu'il soit en capacité de mieux défendre ses droits et aussi ceux de la nature en y étant le garant. Sur les 18 propositions qui vont être examinées par la Commission, la moitié, oui, la moitié proviennent de l'accord électoral signé entre Résistance et Alternative et les autres partenaires du changement. Alors que pour certains, ces propositions sont accueillies comme de beaux slogans progressistes, pour les activistes de Résistance et Alternative et pour les milliers de citoyens engagés qui se sont impliqués dans de nombreux combats citoyens sur les dernières années, les propositions qui vont être évaluées par la Commission représentent beaucoup plus que de simples slogans. Elles représentent le fruit de plusieurs combats. Derrière chacune des propositions, il y a un vécu, une mise en mouvement, une prise de conscience et malheureusement souvent un sentiment d'injustice qui prévaut, voire même un sentiment d'impuissance. Prenons la proposition de Public Interest Litigation. En 2019, 3 membres de Résistance et Alternative saisissent